Hey, what's up? This is the Zod and Drea podcast. I'm Zod.
I'm Drea, and we're so excited. This is our first interview for the year.
Yeah, this is actually our first official interview for the Zod and Drea podcast in the Zod and Drea podcast studios, and we're going to have a great one. We're going to have a great discussion, great person here to discuss some very important issues that are probably affecting you, and you don't even know it yet.
We are extremely excited to be interviewing today Martin Perez, and we want to share with you all of his knowledge, all of his experience, and be able then to leave you with a little bit of information on the issues that are affecting our community.
Yep, but before we get to that, we want to make sure that if you're watching this on YouTube, you hit like and subscribe. Make sure you do the same thing for Facebook, Instagram, wherever the hell you see this thing. We want you to make sure you follow it and you share it because it's really important, and we want to make sure that everything that's in here that's educational gets out to you and all the people that you know.
And even people outside of Arizona. We want this information to be shared everywhere.
Yeah, because it actually does affect other states. So what we're going to be discussing is some education issues, prison, the school to prison pipeline, and not just Maricopa County, but we're going to try to go a little bit outside of that in all of Arizona. There are some things that you may know, some things that you may not know, but if you watch this podcast and watch this vodcast, and we're hoping that you will be influenced enough to actually go out there and do something. And if you don't do something, make sure that you have enough influence where you can go out as a voter and tell your representatives to do something, because what we're going to discuss today with Martin Perez is very important.
It's so important, but yet it's also, too, something that is also going to be affecting the long-term effects of children throughout the state, the county, and also economically it affects and what will be impacted within our state and the rest of the organization.
And so, with no further ado, we welcome Martin Perez.
Welcome to our studio.
The big vice principal. What's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing great, Zod and Drea. Thank you for having me here today. What an honor to be the first one this year and join both of you with this awesome podcast.
Hey, no. Thank you for coming in and breaking in 2018 with us. And being 2018 and it being such a big election year, there are a lot of issues that are going to be going on. As you know, with Trump in office with his first year, there have been attacks on everything from education to that affect people of color and marginalized groups the most. We know that you are a vice principal. Could you just give a little background on your experience as a principal and what education means to you?
Yes, I mean, I'm currently a vice principal at Academia del Pueblo, which is a pre-K 8th grade school with Friendly House. Friendly House has been around in Arizona for 97 years, one of the oldest nonprofits, and so I'm very blessed to be there and serve in that role. But what led me to be a vice principal was my education. I was a middle school teacher. I taught middle school students, and my passion stems from my experience. I've seen at firsthand what a quality education can do and cannot do for students, and one of them is the topic that we're here to discuss today, the school to prison pipeline, which is something that as a vice principal, I try to be that gatekeeper and avoid suspensions as much as possible.
Can you give an overall explanation or definition of what is school to pipeline?
So I think when you talk about the school to prison pipeline, the way to see it is like Saad, you mentioned this year, 2018, last year being a huge presidential year with our current administration. So I think when you talk about school to prison pipeline, it is important to kind of give a brief overview of where we've come today. So this stems from the war on drugs, if you would say. Going back to the 70s when it was targeted to Asian immigrants and opioids. Opioids. Sorry, I need to check my words.
That made a comeback too now.
Opioids, and then you go to shifting over to the mid 1980s from the Nixon administration to the Ronald Reagan administration, and we saw a war on cocaine, for example, and kind of this dismantle and epidemic incarcerations that you saw in the 1980s, mid-1980s, going from, I think, 50,000 to 1996, 97, with like over 500,000 incarcerated numbers for very simple offenses. So the school to prison pipeline stems for those policies, history over time, that it's a direct pipeline from schools to prison where marginalized communities, such as in-school suspension, offenses in classes, being late to class that have been targeted to predominantly minority communities, Latino, or in this case, in some cases, as well, the Black community. So when you talk about school to prison pipeline, it stems from all those policies from the 70s, 80s to today, where there's a direct correlation from the school to prison.
How? Oh, you
No,
doing
no,
that?
go ahead, yeah.
How has the zero tolerance policy that's been placed in so many schools across the country impacted the school to prison pipeline issue?
And thank you. So that's been at the core of the school to prison pipeline, the zero tolerance in school, and it's exactly that. At the core of it is zero tolerance, where it's stemmed, where for example, in classrooms, like a lot of times, like a lot of teachers, classroom management, if a student has not behaved or being disrespectful, is almost this like zero tolerance. Initially, that led to the school to prison pipeline from not having those resources of providing a reflection opportunity for students to make better decisions and not be treated as a punishment, or like, as I mentioned, like tardy to school. A lot of students in Title I schools, low-income communities, transportation's always been a big issue. So that as well, like zero tolerance to being proactive to those challenges. So zero tolerance has been at the core of it, and now you're seeing more initiatives that are trying to deviate that, which are known as a restorative justice approach to the zero tolerance policies.
And one thing that I've noticed and that I've heard about are these are starting earlier and earlier and earlier in schools, to where they are suspending kindergartners. I mean, you know, I think that as a child grows up, they're going to have little fits of rage, and you know, they're going to have temper tantrums. But in order for a teacher to not have enough control to where they then enact suspension on them, that does start the process. And it, you know, I guess it elicits a behavior within that student to, you know, a punishment like that does not give somebody, even a child, a learning ability to cope with what they're doing. It just dismisses him. And could you explain a little bit on how that does affect society as a whole, but also that student and where he goes from there?
Yes, I think you've laid it out perfectly. To me, the school to prison pipeline starts in the classroom. It's that teacher that is truly the gatekeeper to that. You know, that teacher, whether I send him out or, to your point, keep him here and build a relationship with him. So there's staggering numbers, and actually today there's a study by ACLU and the civil rights through the Department of Education that has now highlighted that most of the in-school and out-of-school suspensions are now happening not just in middle school and high school, but in the early years in pre-K, kindergarten, and it starts from that. And I know here in Arizona, for example, we have a Representative Reginald Boulding, who has proposed a bill that highlights exactly that, instilling policies and making it a requirement that to avoid those suspensions, and encouraging and holding the teachers and schools to that high regard, that there shouldn't be a suspensions in the early years, especially in pre-K or in kindergarten.
Shout out to Reginald Boulding. All right, that's our buddy. Did you have something you want to say?
As a teacher yourself, how do you feel like you're equipped or empowered to deal with these situations with the students then, so that this way they're not punished, they're not suspended? And do you find that administrations here in Arizona and the school districts are supportive of other tactics and other ways than to deal with the student that doesn't require them to be punished so much?
And in all honesty, I think that's one of the challenges that we face nationally. And when I say nationally, is with teacher preparation programs. It's very hard because it all stems from classroom management. Oftentimes these situations alter from that teachers are not as fully prepared to manage a class, especially in low-income communities, Title I schools, that with our students, they come in with so much baggage. So I think going back to my teaching days and, you know, now as an administrator, it really truly starts with authentic relationships. Really taking a step back and understanding where the student's coming from, because the truth of the matter is that the students are coming with so much baggage, and it's just that opportunity at getting to know the student and taking time. And I know that nowadays we're very, as teachers and school leaders, it's very pressure with hitting the number with standards and
Yeah.
exams. And so I think with that, there's that challenge that you mentioned, Drea, that as a teacher, you have to take it a step further and really focus on those authentic relationships. And it's not easy. It's a process, and it's an ongoing process. And my teacher, who I still keep in touch from 7th grade, one of the things that I still remember today when I first started as a teacher was her saying, I remember asking her, like, Miss Claygon, what can I do? How do I engage these students? And the one thing that she put it in her words, that before you capture their mind, you have to capture their heart. And I think that's something that we truly do have to, teachers have to really try to do. And it's not easy, but I think it really stems from those really honest, authentic relationships.
Shout out to Miss Claygon. Hey, we also want to know, now you being a teacher, it resonates with me because both my parents were teachers. My mom an English teacher for 50 years, my dad a principal. And the one thing is my mom was a teacher in the East Orange, New Jersey school district, which was not easy. You know, these kids were coming from these broken homes. These were single parent households. But the one thing is, you know, and the way the teachers work is they respected her. And I mean, my mom was not nice when it came to teaching. Like, she was not nice. But we are talking 50 years later, where I was like even furniture shopping over here when I moved to Arizona. We went over to Pruitt's to get some furniture for my house at the time. And we stopped in. My mom's talking to the guy, his brother man, about, I guess there was an armoire or something that she was looking at. And so I was like, okay, Mom, I'm going to go upstairs and just check something else out. I come back down. My mom is on the phone with somebody, using the salesman's phone. And I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? Apparently, the salesman's mentor was a guy that my mom taught back when she taught in Gary, Indiana.
Wow.
And they made that connection to where the guy not just remembered my mom, but he remembered he made her a promise. And he said that he was still trying to keep the promise. I think it was something about teaching kids and going the right path or something like that. So it was like the impact of teachers that they have on students or can have on students when testing isn't the factor, when hitting these goals isn't the factor, when all these standards of the state aren't the factor, but the factor is making that communication and that connection with that child to show that they are greater than who they are. Is that important that we're all these years later, I don't know if it's 50, maybe like 40 years, whatever, this one man who was shopping, while we were shopping in a furniture store, was able to connect with his mentor who my mom taught, and they still had that connection. I mean, that's amazing. And I think that that's one of the things where the school to prison pipeline does not feed into it. I'm really glad for that. We actually I just want to tell that story real quick, but we're going to take a break. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this with Martin. And we're hoping that you're enjoying what you're hearing. We hope you're taking notes.
Hurry back.
All right. Make sure. Well, we're not yet.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, hurry back.
What's up, everybody? I'm Zod.
And I'm Drea.
And we want you to check out the Zod and Drea podcast every Tuesday.
Where can everybody find us at?
You can always check us out on www.zodanddrea.com.
Where else?
You can always check us out also on Facebook at Zod and Drea.
Instagram?
Zod and Drea.
Snapchat?
Zod and Drea.
YouTube?
Zod and Drea.
I see a pattern.
I see a pattern. So if you haven't caught that, catch us at Zod and Drea on all the social networks. But also, make sure you subscribe to the Zod and Drea podcast. Where?
At zodanddrea.com.
And also on YouTube and iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. We're coming for you.
Let us know what you think. And if you want to be a guest, reach out to us.
And put all of your input into whatever our topics are for the week. So we hope to check you out and see you there.
Bye.
Now we're continuing our conversation with Martin.
All right. Sorry, I know I had to give that little story at the end, but we got some more time with Martine. Did you have a question you want to ask?
The question I have is, what got you involved in teaching? Really, I always ask that of teachers nowadays because, especially in Arizona. Look, I don't mean to bash in my state, but we treat our teachers so horribly,
Terribly.
So I always am curious on why do you want to deal with all of this?
Wow, that's Drell, thank you for that question. It's really the question that wakes me up at every day in the morning and when I go to sleep at night. And I actually related to Zod's story of your mom. And first of all, what's your mom's last name?
Mrs. Whiting.
Mrs. Whiting. So shout out to Zod's mom. Thank you for an awesome man. So I also had a teacher, and I go back to Miss Clagon, 7th grade. Long story short, I'm from California. I grew up in Compton, California. Straight out of Compton.
Yeah.
With Dr. Dre and NWA. They were a lot older than me, but I kind of looked up to that.
Still rep it.
And just in a nutshell, it stemmed from that. Teachers like Miss Clagon and other teachers that I've had, but grew up in a household where in a community with drug violence and the gangs and challenges that you would see in the community, and kind of was living in two worlds. I felt like I wanted to be that, but then I really wasn't, because I knew that education was important, but I didn't see a connection. And it was teachers like Miss Clagon, like Zod mentioned, that really kind of put things into perspective. That it wasn't just like the test or homework, but it was like, hey, if you don't get it together, this is what could happen to you. But if you do, this is what could also happen to you. And long story short, shifting over, was able to go to high school, and my brother and I were only a year apart, and unfortunately he fell through the cracks. He fell victim to the school to prison pipeline. So when I was a senior in high school, he actually went to prison for the first time. And when the dream of my family and myself to be the first in my family to go to college became a reality, as I was getting dropped off at the college campus at UC Berkeley, my brother was going back to the penitentiary system for a third time. And so long story short, it was my brother's experience, teachers that I had that really challenged me to give back to what gave to me. And that's what brought me to Phoenix, Arizona, through a program called Teach for America. And I would say that I knew that I wanted to get into the classroom and become a teacher, with or without Teach for America, but that's what brought me here. So shout out to all those Teach for America alumni. We have many great alumni like Mr.
You definitely
Representative
do.
Bolding.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, you asked the question, Drea, it was that teachers that believed in me, my brother who really challenged me to give that opportunity to youth like himself, and really make it possible to all students to have access to a high quality education.
That's interesting. So obviously we love teachers. We're very fond of them. Could you make some of the connections also, not just with the school to prison pipeline, but with the for-profit prisons?
Yes, I mean, you mentioned that for-profit prisons right now, they're making money off kids' backs.
Yeah.
As you all know, research shows that it starts in 3rd grade. Prisons, they determine the number of beds with the reading level of students in 3rd grade. And you see policies like that are being instilled of students that by 3rd grade, if they're not at the reading level, there's beds being built for those students. So there's that direct pipeline from the school to prison pipeline. And then going back to that, I was a freshman reading below academic grade level. So I was in 7th grade, I was reading at a 3rd grade level. And then by freshman year, I was academically behind. So you see that in the classroom today, that if education, if we don't really provide all the resources to our students, that's that direct pipeline that the students will eventually, statistically, will end up, to your point, where for-profit prisons are really making their profit on kids' backs.
Which is really interesting, because you see in a lot of the poorer neighborhoods, they wind up getting old books. They wind up getting old workbooks, and used materials, so that they can't catch up to a lot of the people in the suburbs, where you can see that it's systemic. It is a problem. And a lot of people don't like to address it because you can tell who the lobbyists are and the people who actually support that type of an education in order to fill the beds that you speak about. I mean, it's a sad situation.
And they don't want to admit that this is what's going on, right? But they're kind of reporting to a bigger power, if you will, those dollars that are coming in.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and I think to both of your points, I think that with the school to prison pipeline and going back to education, it's not just a shift in the mindset with the teachers and parents and stakeholders, but it truly does come down to changing the policies, starting at the local level, at the school board
I was
level,
literally gonna ask what
starting
you
at
would
the
do.
state level
Yeah.
legislation, and ultimately at the federal level. And we have examples here in Arizona, and the importance of civically engaged community. Who do you elect to office? Who do you elect to your school board? Who do you elect to represent your legislative district? That's important, and I think that's where our parents and students need to be there, need to be at the door and asking those questions. And parents, ultimately, when their child is being recommended for suspension or expulsion, asking those questions, what has been done for my kid or daughter, that I think that it goes back to not just the mindset, but really making sure that we're adding pressure to changing these policies to dismantle the school to prison pipeline.
You bring up a great solution of having the parents involved. I remember growing up how we were always taught that the teachers and the schools, that was it. Like whatever they said is gold, right? So obviously that's changed. How do you empower then parents to be aware of policies that are going on and know that they're rights for as parents and for their kids? Where do they get that information?
Yeah, so to your point, Drea, going back to your point that there's like iffy ways, and that information's out there. Currently, right now, there's a campaign through ACLU. It's called Demand to Learn. And
I know Demand to
and
Learn,
I'm
yes.
actually a member of that. My school's a member of that. And ironically, just last week, we made a visit to Denver, Colorado. And the website, and I could share this, and you can
Please
go
do.
to
Please
the
do. We're
link.
gonna put it on the
The
site.
website is demandtolearnaz.org. Again, demandtolearnaz.org. So this campaign, what it does is exactly that. It involves all stakeholders, parents, students, community members, elected leaders, and they bring them to the table to hear perspective and hear those personal anecdotes. So in terms of how to get the parents involved, this campaign, the goal of it is to provide a platform and a space for parents and students to share those personal anecdotes, because there's thousands, hundreds of them, where students are being unjustly suspended. And so this is one example. As I mentioned, when we went to Denver last week, we were there to visit a high school, North High School. And this high school is nationally recognized because it's currently practicing restorative justice approaches to engage their parents, as you've asked Andrea, to get them more involved as an alternative to school suspensions.
Andrea went to North.
But not in Colorado.
This is northern Colorado.
Sorry, North
Go
in
Mustangs.
Arizona, but Mustangs, shout out. But what I also want to know is, where do you think that school resource officers fall into place with this as well? I mean, you're starting to see a lot more of those in schools, and you wonder, is it for the safety for the student? Is it safety for the parent, or are they a plant, for something larger?
Well, honestly, as the saying goes, right, there's good apples and bad apples. Not to say that all police officers are bad, because, we have a community policing that started in Portland and Oakland. We see a lot of those examples here in Phoenix. But I think that the question should be, is there even a reason to have a police
Yeah,
officer
exactly,
on
right?
campus?
Yeah.
I think that's the first question. We have a staggering numbers of increasing SROs, police officers in schools. And I think that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Why do we even need a police officer on campus? I think that's the first question. And then secondly, being very transparent, right? Like when you have a police officer on campus, and if a student is disrespectful, I mean, more than likely that's a very quick arrest. So I think that Maricopa County, you see those numbers, And I actually have some statistics here.
Please
Go ahead,
share
read
those.
them off.
So in Arizona, and I'll share these with Drea and Zod, and they could put these on the screen. But Latino students currently in charter high schools are 6 times more than likely than their white peers to receive out of school suspensions. And then in terms of African American students in charter high schools, are 8 times more than likely than their white peers to receive out of school suspensions. And then students with disabilities in elementary and middle schools across district, charter, private are twice as likely as students without disabilities to receive in-school suspensions. And then lastly, in district schools, neighboring tribal communities with our Native American students are up to 10 times more than likely than their white peers to be suspended. So the statistics are very staggering, and I think it stems to the questions that you've asked, that it's not just a statistic. Ultimately, it's a long-term impact, not just on the student or community, but our state financially.
Because when you think about it, what impact is that for an 8-year-old to be suspended, to have a police officer handcuff them at school, put them in a room by themselves, isolated away from their peers, and made to feel wrong? What does that do to them
It's
down the road?
practice. Like, it's practice, and a lot of them even have metal detectors. I mean, think what places have metal detectors when you walk through them? Cops, as soon. I mean, it shouldn't be a place of learning. That's usually a place of punishment. You know, I wouldn't. I mean, the only thing missing are the bars on the windows, but I'm sure that's coming soon.
That's already there.
You know,
Yes.
Mesa has a plan for that, I'm sure. You know, we're closing out in the last couple of minutes, but could you give? What I want to know is, we know, and you explained what the parents should probably do. Could you explain what you think a child should do if they're in a situation in order to avoid that school to prison pipeline? What should a child do, especially if they're in a situation where they get into trouble?
I think a child should do, and this is something that, in just my recent visit back home to California, LA, from the airport to when I was going to visit my parents, a gentleman who works at a nonprofit with incarcerated youth who are being instilled, he shared something to me that was very powerful. He's like, you could, as a child, you could, if you decide to do education, one, you could decide to not just improve your education, but if you fall victim to the school to prison pipeline, you're allowing others to make money off your backs. So when you go to prison, it's that child that has that say. So I think a child has that opportunity when found in that situation to not only think about themselves, but to think about their family, and to really find that adult on their school campus that they can connect to. So whether it be a teacher, whether it be a support staff, or even the school leader, to reach out to that person and be honest. If you feel like you're being unfairly treated, be honest, share it with those individuals, because there is a way out, but you have to be an advocate for yourself.
I mean, that's great advice.
Right.
You know, I mean, we know what the parents have to do, and now we know what the kids have to do.
Parents have a voice.
And obviously this problem isn't going to go away anytime soon, but if we can dismantle it from that root, I mean, imagine it being dismantled then all the way up and above. I mean, we'd like to thank my man, Vice Principal Martin Perez, for coming and stopping back on the Zod and Drea podcast. We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because this is like almost part 1. Like part 2 is almost the 13th Amendment to this.
Exactly.
You know, like
Right.
there is a part 2, but we appreciate you stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.
Come back anytime.
Thank you. I'll be back whenever you invite me back.
No doubt. Well, there you have it. What do you think?
Wow, that's a lot of knowledge.
It's a lot of things going on, and it's not just happening here, it's happening probably in your state too, so keep an eye out. We want to thank Martin Perez, the Vice Principal, that's going to be his new title, the Vice Principal
Just
for
the Vice
stopping in, the
Principal.
Vice Principal for coming in and stopping by Zod and Drea podcast. Make sure you do check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, everywhere you can find at Zod and Drea.
Once you like this video, subscribe. Look for that thumb up there. We want you to subscribe. And also let us know what you thought of today's interview. What are your thoughts? Have you been impacted by the school to prison pipeline system. What is that? Or is it something that it's new to you? Just share with us your ideas and your thoughts.
Yeah, and make sure you go onto the Facebook page and you sign up for the Zod Andrea Think Tank, because we have a lot of topics like this where we want people who love to have conversations to engage. So don't just sign up on our regular Facebook page, but look for Zod Andrea Think Tank and commence to writing. All right?
Bye.
Peace.